It might take them 5 attempts. It might take them 3. It could take them 8. It could take them 15 attempts because leaving is really dangerous and it's often a process. And they come to us sometimes. I liken it to the tea, putting the tea kettle on and the steam is building and they've got to get a little bit of steam released. So sometimes survivors will come and they'll stay with us in emergency shelter for a month or a few weeks because they know that their partner was escalating and it's not safe to be there right now. But they have kids in common. They don't have a job. They maybe had a job, but their partner interrupted it, right? Made it really hard for them. Sometimes they are the primary breadwinner in the household, but the minute the money comes in, their partner's taking it.
Welcome to the Bay Bills, the podcast spotlighting the founders and executives behind Tampa Bay's biggest brands. I'm your host, Tracie Domino, and today's episode is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. Because this guest isn't just building a business, she's saving lives. Mindy Murphy is the president and CEO of the Spring of Tampa Bay, Hillsborough County's certified domestic violence center and one of the largest of Florida's 42 certified centers. Founded in 1977, the Spring has provided sanctuary and services to more than 60,000 abused adults and their children. It operates a 128-bed residential shelter, offers free legal services, therapy, transitional housing, a 24-hour crisis hotline, and was the first domestic violence agency in the United States to have an accredited on-site school for resident children. Mindy has led the Spring as president and CEO since 2012. She has previously chaired the Hillsborough County Domestic Violence Task Force, serves on the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Team, and has been interviewed over 100 times by outlets from the Tampa Bay Times to the New York Times. She's a University of Virginia graduate who has spent more than 30 years doing this work, not because it's easy, but because she believes it takes all of us. Welcome, Mindy. You spent more than 30 years working in organizations dedicated to children and families. Most people drift into a career, but this feels like something that chose you. What was the moment that set you on this path?
I mean, that's a great question. I think all my life I've loved stuff that kids love, right? I'm a kid at heart. Spending time with kids is some of my favorite time. And so growing up, all of my volunteer activities from a very young age, my mom's probably the one who set me on that path. From a very young age, my sister and I were kind of expected to tag along with my mom. She was a very committed volunteer, first in Kansas City. When we moved, I was actually born in Germany when my dad was on assignment with Procter & Gamble over there. But when we moved stateside, mom, was volunteering. And so my sister and I are 11 months apart, so we were volunteering too. So earliest memories are helping other kids. We were assigned to kids with profound limitations, and we helped them with gymnastics, or we helped them in the pool on Saturdays with all our other little friends. And we were probably not any older than 10 or 11 when we were doing that. And then as I got older, I started going to camp. And so I went to summer camp, and of course I loved camp. So then I was a camp counselor. So every job I had was around kids. I was a soccer referee for, I was probably 13 and the kids I was reffing were probably 9, 10, 11. All my jobs were focused on children. It just kind of became part of my DNA. And so when I went off to college, I thought I was going to be an attorney, and I probably would have been a pretty good attorney. I had some job offers when I was in high school because I was on a mock trial team, and people said, if you make it through and you go to law school, we'll hire you. Being an attorney probably would have not made me as good a person because it would have forced me into a black and white thinking, which isn't the best for me. So I graduated from UVA. I ended up right out of college here in Tampa. I started volunteering with an agency called the Child Abuse Council. It's now called Champions for Children. And the next thing you know, Liz Kennedy, who was my earliest mentor here in Tampa, she said, "You should come to work for me." And so I did. And then about 2 weeks later, she went on vacation with her husband, David. And I got a nice note in the mail that said, I'm resigning and you're going to be just fine. And I was 23 years old. And I thought, I'm not going to be fine. I don't know what I'm doing. But that kind of started my career in the nonprofit sector and specifically working with kids. And then, of course, I'm now at the Spring working with kids and adults.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
She had such incredible faith of you.
I think she
can see the future.
Yeah, or maybe she was just tired of working. Who knows?
So you've been leading the Spring since 2012.
Yep.
Correct, right? So take it back to those first days and
Yeah.
what did you inherit and what did you immediately know needed to change and what was the situation?
Yeah, well, so that's another, like my origin story at the Spring was completely by accident. I had been out of the workforce for more than a decade, raising my son. I, at that point, was a single mom, and my son was on the autism spectrum. And so, he had a lot of extra things that we had to do to set him on a path for success. He's 27 now, and he's literally practically perfect. I was not working, and I wasn't planning to go back into the workforce. Some circumstances in my life changed, so it was at the point where I was starting to look for a job. But the reason that they were calling me from the Spring was because I had been the volunteer board chairman for the child welfare system, which is a very big, at that time, about a $65 million organization. So I'm the volunteer board chair. But that meant I did some, advocacy, in the for-profit sector, you call it lobbying, but we call it advocacy at the state level and, literally, helping at the local level to promote the child welfare system as a whole. And so a lot of the candidates who were applying for the job at the Spring, the CEO job at the Spring, they had worked for what was known as Hillsborough Kids. And so the one person I knew at the Spring who served on the board of directors, her name was Lisa Brock. She was a crisis PR professional in Hillsborough County for many years. She would call me and say, hey, do you know anything about Susie? And I'd say what I knew and go on my merry way. This went on for probably a couple months. And then in May of 2012, she called me and said, Mindy, she knew that I was pivoting to go back into the workforce. She's like, this would be the perfect job for you. You should apply. And I said, oh, Lisa, thank you so much. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and suggesting me. I wouldn't know the first thing about running the Spring. I've been out of the workforce for 13 years. And so I said, thank you, no thank you. I went to sleep that night and I popped up the next morning and I'd had this very vivid dream. And I was like, this is your perfect job. I popped up out of bed and I thought, if you're going to help kids, right? Because again, my whole lens was kids at the time. If you're going to help kids, if you help their mom, right, the kids are going to be successful, right? The kids are going to get what they need. They're going to be supported. And so I called her back and I said, I've changed my mind. I'd like to interview. I didn't have a resume. I hadn't interviewed in, more than 15 years, right? And they moved quickly. So the board chair at the time, her name's Yvonne Fry. She's now one of my dearest friends on earth, but she lives in Plant City. And so the way that the interview was going to work best was to have it at in the back room of the Cracker Barrel off I-4. So there were like 7 people and me in a Cracker Barrel. They interviewed me. One board member wasn't available. His name's Ron Cristaldi. He runs Shoemaker, so he's an attorney in town. So the dichotomy of I did this interview in the Cracker Barrel, and then a couple days later, I went to downtown to Shoemaker's offices, very different, interviewed with him, and like a week later, I started. It was the week before my birthday, 2 weeks before a major fundraiser for the Spring. So boom, I started. No idea what I was doing. Had to go speak, at this fundraiser, I think with about 2 weeks of experience at the Spring. There was a West Chase. Every October, they do the Great West Chase, which is like a 5K run that year was benefiting the Spring. So I had to get up and knowledgeably speak about the Spring, even though I had no idea. So that was kind of the start. And what I quickly realized, so long way to get to the answer to your question, is it's not like you are not the entire, being for the Spring. You've got to figure out who on your team has the knowledge and expertise for any of the tasks that the Spring needs to do, or that any business needs to do. Make sure that you are supporting them, that you're setting them up for success. And so there was a lot of moving people into different roles, shifting some people out. The first couple weeks, I also found out that we were financially in the hole by about 400,000. So I was going to have to make some immediate layoffs. So my first couple of weeks on the job, I had to basically fire people. I got hugs from a couple of people, which was unusual, and it maybe gave me a little bit of confidence in what I was having to do. But I quickly learned you've got to rely on the people around you, and you can't. You're not going to be the expert in the room, and I certainly wasn't. Staff, after they got to know me, a couple of them would poke fun at me and say, Mindy, that first 6 months, you basically spent most of the 6 months. We would tell you things, and you would just nod your head and say, yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what I did. Because I didn't know the first thing about domestic violence. I'm embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed because I think most of us, I say I'm embarrassed, but I'm really not. Most of us are ignorant about issues until either need to be knowledgeable about them or until someone around us in our orbit, requires us to be knowledgeable. And so I would have been one of those people would have been like, I don't know anybody who's experienced domestic violence, right? And then I realized immediately doing this work that was completely false, because within about 2 weeks of stepping into the role, I had friends and colleagues coming out of the woodwork to tell me their domestic violence stories and to reach out for help, because now I had instantly made myself a safe person. It was really, really, really shocking start to doing this work, I think, in some respects.
Well, and the Spring was founded, right, in 1977 by a group of women who identified this exact need, right?
Yeah.
And wanted to find solutions.
Sure.
And there's something powerful about that story. What does it mean now to be the steward, something that was built on that before the resources existed, and before even just what it was like for women in that 1977 was so different. How did that? How does that all feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we're in 2026 right now. 2027 is going to be our 50th anniversary, so we have a whole team of board and staff and some volunteers working on how do we tell the first 50-year story of the Spring, and what does the next 50 years look like. It is unlike people who start a business, right? I'm a steward of our work, right? I'm not the founder. If I were, I would have been about 7 years old, right? I'm the steward, and I'm building on what people who came before me have built, and hopefully the people who come after me will build even more. But those women in the early days, I mean, were absolute trailblazers, because it was kind of an accidental thing. The one woman who was still able to kind of articulate those early years. I happened to talk to her probably about a decade ago. She's since passed. She told me that, they basically knew someone who was a friend of a friend who was in a very violent marriage. The husband was very violent towards the wife. She was at this point afraid for her life. And so these four women were friends. They lived in Hyde Park before Hyde Park was, as ritzy as it is now. And they said, well, let's just hide her out. You've got a spare bedroom, So they said to one of them, you've got the spare bedroom. We'll all help you. And so kind of on a lark, friend of a friend in her back bedroom and hid her out from her husband. And apparently, word spread rapidly, and all these people started saying, hey, I need help too. And that was 1976. And so within a year, right, they realized, well, we can't just keep doing this, just in an unstructured way. We're going to need to form a nonprofit. And so in 1977, they formed the nonprofit. Were able to rent a space, right? Instead of being in their own houses, they rented a house down near MacDill Air Force Base and opened the doors. And then we just rapidly grew from there. For a long time, the Spring was the biggest domestic violence center in the state. We're not anymore, but we're still among the, top 2 or 3 of the largest centers. So the big urban areas are where the big centers are. But those women were, just absolute sheroes because the risks they took to help someone else were really extraordinary.
Well, and exactly what you just said, when most people think of domestic violence centers, they think of a shelter, right? But the Spring is running legal services, therapy, transitional housing, an accredited school, crisis hotline, a thrift store, prevention education, its entire ecosystem, right?
Yep.
So How do you think about running an organization this complex, and how do you keep the mission from getting lost in the mechanics of like massive work?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I will say I love this question because I am so tired as the CEO of a nonprofit through, again, lack of knowledge, not, I don't think intent, but people discount the fact that we're businesses, right? My nonprofits, the Spring of Tampa Bay's nonprofit status is just that. It's a tax status, right? I am running a business, and I happen to be running a business that has a whole bunch, as you just rattled off, of very distinct service lines, completely unrelated. The fact that we run a 13-person law firm is very different than running a retail operation, a thrift store and donation center. So we're running retail, we're running, a law firm, we're running a therapy firm, essentially, because we've got 4 therapists. Then we're running a 128-bed shelter, and then we're running a 12-unit apartment complex. So, and on and on. We have a sleepaway camp in the summer. So we send kids it's just a week, but we literally take kids to a week of camping, and we've created an entire camping experience. So there are a whole bunch of things we're doing, but what centers us is everything is focused on domestic violence. So over the years, I've had sometimes elected officials come and say, hey, we could give you this, this property. You should consider, asking for this property because we need more, homeless programs for women. I stop them and say, sweetly, right, we don't run homeless programs for women. We run domestic violence programs for women who happen to be homeless as a result of the domestic violence. And that's nuanced, but it's completely different. And so the way we stay mission aligned is everything we do is through a domestic violence lens. We say no to things that aren't through that lens, right? And we've had enormous growth since I started 14 years ago. When I started, we were about a $3.5 million organization. We're a $9.5 million, some years $10 million organization. Our staffing has grown a little bit, but very targeted. So, we brought on, obviously, we didn't have a law firm 14 years ago. Now we have the largest law firm for domestic violence in the state of Florida. We didn't have a therapy services division. Now we're only one of, I think, two, possibly 3 centers that has literally licensed mental health counseling on site. We're one of 3 centers, no, 4 or 5 centers that has a partnership with Camp Hope America doing Sleepaway Camp, which is an evidence-based camping and mentoring program. So we're the only domestic violence center with an on-site, like, full-service cafeteria dining facility. Most of the centers have kitchens where the residents make their own food. So there's been a lot of things we're doing. We're the first in the United States and still the only in the state of Florida that has a on-site accredited school. So we have a K-5 elementary school in partnership with Hillsborough County Public Schools for almost 40 years now. We've run a little K-5 classroom, and we have a full child care center that runs from infants all the way up to school age. We stay in our lane of domestic violence, but within that lane, we have grown our service array to where I said we used to kind of be a C, where we had almost all the things you would need, but there was a gap. And the gap, in my opinion, at least for the time being, has been filled by adding therapy services, adding legal services, adding more kids programming. And my goal now is taking that, now that we've got this, instead of a C, we've got an O, or we've got a circle, it's then pushing that circle from the inside out to expand, to make sure geographically within Hillsborough County that we're providing access to people and trying to kind of push our services out into the further reaches our county, because our county's 10 square miles shy of the size of the state of Rhode Island. So we're the size of a small state, and our services need to reflect that.
I don't think most people realize that.
No.
I love that you mentioned that about the tax status.
Yeah.
What people think about a nonprofit, right, they think it's not supposed to make money.
Right.
And someone said this to me one time. I thought it was a really good quote. They said, nonprofit is a tax status, not a business law.
Right. Yes, exactly.
It's like, if you think of it that way, you're like, oh, I understand,
Yeah. And we're so scrutinized, right? I mean, it's a remarkable the amount of attention people put on nonprofits. And there are some bad actors out there. But when you talk about, the nonprofits that have been established for a really long time, like the Spring, that have been around forever, we have probably 26, 27 audits annually. There are people coming on site. The month of March, I think we had 4 4 or 5 different entities come physically on site or do a desk, audit to monitor us to make sure that we're doing what we say we're going to do with the money. So we're so heavily scrutinized, and I would put us up against any corporation for our ability to, finesse a dollar. I mean, there's nobody that's more effective with a dollar than the Spring of Tampa Bay. I'm just going to I'm throwing that gauntlet down on that.
Well, absolutely. Just the way you said, $9 to $10 million, and then be able to do all of this. That's like insane. Yeah. And you've served over 60,000 people since you opened, which is staggering. And most staggering to even think that many people require this. Yeah. How do you measure the impact when what you're really measuring is whether like someone's life got better or they survived? How is that? Like, how do you follow through the how long they stay with you?
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge, that not just the Spring, but all of the domestic violence service providers across the United States. There's 41 certified domestic violence centers in the state of Florida, but then across the state, across the country, there are several thousand. And the biggest challenge we have is the evaluation of, the so what, right? So we've provided these services, so what? Like what happened after? Because what we know about survivors of domestic violence is that sometimes the survivor leaves the moment they figured out that domestic violence is at play, right? They leave the first time something escalates. But other survivors, it might take them 5 attempts. It might take them 3. It could take them 8. It could take them 15 attempts, because leaving is really dangerous. And it's often a process. And so they come to us sometimes. I liken it to the tea, putting the tea kettle on and the steam is building and they've got to get a little bit of steam released. So sometimes survivors will come and they'll stay with us in emergency shelter for a month or a few weeks because they know that their partner was escalating and it's not safe to be there right now. But they have kids in common, they don't have a job, or, they maybe had a job, but their partner interrupted it, right? Made it really hard for them. Sometimes they are the primary breadwinner in the household, but the minute the money comes in, their partner's taking it. And so they come seeking safety, but they're not able or ready yet to break free because they don't feel like on the other side of breaking free that they're going to be able to put a roof over their heads, that they're going to be able to feed their kids. And so they come, and then maybe 6 months later they come again, or they dip their toes in the water of different services. Leaving can take a while. And when they are leaving but haven't yet fully left, if we're reaching out and saying, hey, it's the Spring, we're checking on you, whether it's by phone or by email, we all know the amount of surveillance that it can occur in this day and age with social media, with keystroke, recovery stuff. Anybody with, a few dollars can go and get devices that they can use to monitor their partner, to monitor their kids. And so reaching out to them to do follow-up can put their life in danger because we don't always know the status. And so we have a hard time monitoring the aftermath. But what we know is that statistically over time, survivors are much safer when they're working with a certified domestic violence center because each time they come to us, they're getting more tools in their toolkit. And I know anecdotally from being in the community, I'm often in the community wearing my name tag or wearing, a Spring t-shirt or a Spring logoed polo. People will stop me and say, do you work at the Spring? And I say, yes. And they will tell me their story, right? I was a little kid with my mom and we fled to the Spring. And the first question I always ask is, well, how's your mom doing now? And she's great. She has a partner who loves her. She has a job. I'm great, because I'm seeing them. Usually it's in a business setting, right? Sometimes I'm speaking to businesses and they come up after. Other times I'm, checking out in a Target, and it might be the Target cashier, but they're good. They're safe. They're not in dangerous relationships. So I get a lot of anecdotal evidence for that. But it's the single greatest challenge we have is the reporting in that first year after services, because safety's such a huge issue for our survivors in a way that people forget. Like most service providers aren't serving someone who has an active agent of destruction, right? Who's actively trying to cause them harm. And I think people forget that a lot about the work that we do. We're working with somebody, but there's someone else that's circling them who wants to do them harm. And it's scary.
But, I would imagine, right? Like sometimes they're then trying to get help. amplifies that.
Oh, 100%. So the single greatest time of danger for survivors of domestic violence is when they're leaving, when they're thinking about leaving, because normally when you're thinking about leaving, your partner is very, the abusive partner is very attuned to their victim, right? They spend a lot of time paying attention to their victim. So they can sense when that person's thinking about leaving. That puts them at heightened risk. The actual act of leaving, very dangerous. And then the aftermath, for probably anywhere from 6 to 12 months after leaving, you're also at risk. I mean, there have been survivors who've been murdered, 6 months later. The abuser's waiting in ambush. It can be even longer than that. But that danger zone is really when somebody leaves. So we, as a society, spend so much time saying, why doesn't she leave, right? And then when she does, that can sometimes be what gets her killed. And so we don't spend enough time asking, why are we letting people abuse, right? Why in the 21st century are people still allowed to get away with it?
So that's actually goes straight to my next question.
Yeah.
So you chair the Hillsborough County Domestic Violence Task.
I have in the past. No longer. Now one of my team members does. Yay.
And you sat on, or you still sit on the
Fatality
review team. Right?
Yep.
And when you're in those rooms reviewing cases where someone maybe didn't survive, how does that change what you do, or what would be the thing that would, if we could change one thing, what would, if we could make that magic thing, and that maybe it's blue sky,
right?
See, but what could done possibly to make that better?
I think the answer it a couple ways. So I think the sea change shift is a societal one where we successfully challenge society enough that there's enough people saying, when interrupting, every time someone says, well, why isn't I would, if somebody did that to me, I would leave, right? That we interrupt the natural victim blaming that society is really good at, where everything is about, and I'm using gendered language. Men can also be victims. And we, since the 1983 is the earliest record I have of us serving a man in shelter. So we are an agency that has always been committed to serving men as well. So I want to put that on the table. But when we're talking about domestic violence, there's this many, women victims and maybe this many men. And typically the power and control tactics that are used against women, right? The surveilling and all of that, you don't see as much in when men are being victimized by women. When in men in same-sex relationships, it's probably very similar. We spend all our time focused on the victim and what they did or didn't do. We do this with sexual assault as well, right? People get raped and then we're asking, but what was she wearing? Instead of being completely focused on why does this person, this perpetrator, think they can get away with it? And a lot of times they can think they can get away with it because they do, right? Society does not hold them to account. I'm going to throw out Johnny Depp. I know there's a lot of Johnny Depp lovers out there, but Johnny Depp, right? If you read the vile and filthy and awful things that he said in text message, women can weaponize against their abusive partners. And you certainly see that. It's hard. I believe that Johnny Depp is an abuser, and yet he got away with it. He's still repping a very popular line of cologne, right? I mean, moments after all of that, you walk into a department store and there's a life-size poster of Johnny Depp. So, I'm sorry I'm calling it out for all the Johnny Depp lovers, but he got away with awful behavior, wasn't held to account. So people who abuse, they're not being held to account by society. And, we'll focus on, we, the collective, we will focus on a system, right? We'll focus on the military, we'll focus on law enforcement, and we'll focus on the court system, right? And say, well, it's their fault. But all those systems are a reflection of society, right? Systems are just a collection of people from society. And so the greatest gift we could get is to interrupt every time somebody starts saying, well, how did she cause her abuse? Somebody in that crowd says, hey, time out. She didn't cause the abuse. He, or she, as the case may be, chose, right, to use power and control. This is a choice that people who batter make. And if we could just start interrupting that every time and say, hey, let's talk about the person doing the battering instead of focusing on the victim and, her contributions to battering. Because victims are not to blame for the battering. We can all have disagreements, but like I'm sure in your life, right, you have people who you love, you disagree with. They don't turn around and then hit you, right? Or take away all your money, or, tear up your clothes, or set your belongings on fire, right? I mean, that's what's happening to survivors of domestic violence. And we seem to want to blame them for it when we wouldn't blame ourselves, right? In a workplace, like one of the things we do in training is we'll ask people, have you ever been in a job you didn't like, right? And there's almost never anyone in the room who hasn't been in at least a job at some point that they didn't like. And the second question is then, well, what did you do? The moment you decided you didn't like that job, did you just up and quit? And nobody ever says, yeah, I quit the same day, right? And then we start asking, well, why didn't you quit right away? Well, fear, right? Money, embarrassment, right? All of the things that people say, right? And sometimes they stayed in that job for another 2 or 3 years. Sometimes it was another 2 or 3 months. It's the same decision making that a survivor has.
I probably think it'll get better.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It'll get better. Right. Or, or it's my fault. Right. Because again, what batterers do over time is they tell their victim, it's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault, until you begin to believe that. If you're in a toxic work relationship, right, where your boss is a bully or abusive, right, your boss is probably doing the same thing to you. So when we try and flip that script and say, hey, think about a time where something wasn't going right, and what did you do? Did you instantly so have some compassion for survivors whose lives can be intertwined because of finances, because of marriage, because of kids in common. The other way that they're so harmed is kids, right? We say, oh, you need to leave this abusive person, but then, oh, he's the dad of your kids. Well, he's a dad, he still has rights. So the mixed messages survivors get too, it's really tough. Now you've got a parent with this person who's abusing you and put yourself in harm's way because they're saying, well, he's still a good dad. And I would argue, not a good dad if he's beating up mom. So,
wow.
Sorry.
I don't apologize at all. It's just so complicated.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. And it's one thing I think, if all I kept thinking is if it's physical abuse, you could see the scars possibly, and then maybe there's evidence.
Right.
But it's emotional or financial, like you're saying, it's probably so much harder to prove in those cases, especially when there's children involved.
Sure.
Just so challenging.
Yeah, and it happens behind closed doors. And a lot of people who are abusive are, charming and manipulative, right? So they present to the outside world that they're this great person, right? They might be the neighbor who helps you change your, tire, or the guy at work who, who stays late to help you, right? So their public persona and their private persona can be very different.
Right, of course. And so it's because, just as you're saying, it's because this is everywhere in the community, and people don't want to see it. And
right.
I'm sure I put myself in that category. You kind of look away, or you don't look for it, I guess.
Sure.
For them.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And what would you say to someone who thinks it doesn't touch them?
Right. Again, I was one of those people, shamefully, I admit, years ago, right? I understood child abuse. That was my entire background. I did not understand domestic violence. So I had to do a lot of reading and skilling up when I stepped into this role. And, a lot of internal reflection and reckoning for the ways in which, my inner thoughts still sometimes, right? I still have to interrupt myself, because we all come to anything we do with natural biases that are sometimes ingrained in us from, a lifetime of thinking. For me, it was stepping into the role as CEO that it was shocking. Within about a month, my son went to school, at a little private school for kids with learning differences. And one of the moms who I'd known for a couple of years, right, our kids had play dates together, she came forward and shared what was happening in her marriage. And, her husband was a very successful professional, and he was raping her to the point where she had to go to the hospital and have emergency surgery and services because of the damage that had been done during the course of the rape. And, never, ever would have suspected. She never would have disclosed to me if I hadn't made myself safe. She would have just continued suffering in silence. And so we mobilized. He traveled a lot for work, able to work with law enforcement at the airport, because the airport can make arrests. And so when he was traveling for work, she knew his schedule. He was able to be served with an injunction. Our attorneys assisted with that, and get his weapons surrendered, because she was very concerned. He had a lot of guns. So she was concerned what was going to happen. And was able to eventually safely get divorced and carry on with her life. Had I not stepped into this role, she might never have sought help or disclosed to someone. So, but you don't have to you don't have to work for the spring to make yourself a safe person. You can volunteer your time and then talk about it. You can or you can just simply talk about domestic violence, right? Open the doors for the people around you to say, hey, I've been thinking a lot about domestic violence, right? There's always cases in the news that are a natural touch point to start that conversation, and let people know around you that you care about this issue and that you're somebody who would be open to disclosure, right? Because a lot of times when survivors do get brave enough to tell someone, we as their friend, it's uncomfortable, and then we minimize it, right? Oh, I'm sure he didn't mean to, to do that, or maybe you're overreacting. There's all these ways in which we deny what the experience of the survivor, or we minimize what she's saying. And the thing is, when a survivor dips their toe in the water of telling you, they are probably telling you, the iceberg that just the little tip just right above the water, and that massive piece of ice that's underneath the water is all the stuff they're not sharing, right? So they dip their toes in the water, they tell you something, and if you respond with disbelief or minimizing, they're going to shut down again. So the gift we can do is to make ourselves a safe person to talk to. And when they do share something, even if you don't, you're not ready to fully believe what they're saying about their partner because your experience with their partner's been different, you can say, gosh, that is awful what's happening to you. I'm so sorry. I want you to feel safe coming to me. I want you to know I'm going to keep your confidence. I don't like that, right? If you need help, I'm here for you. And then you're making yourself the safe person.
It's simple.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's not super hard. And it's shocking. I'm not the only one who's experienced, right? The minute you start talking about this issue, I've got board members who have said the same thing, right? That they came to our board for one reason or another, but they didn't have any personal experience of domestic violence. One of them's a CEO of a wildly successful company. And she's like, it was shocking to me because now I've got people who work for me disclosing. I've got people in my church disclosing. I've got friends disclosing.
So in her case, what do you do then? Like, what is the next step after that?
So I always tell people you do not have to be an expert in domestic violence. You just have to be knowledgeable in the resources, right? So Hillsborough County, it's the Spring of Tampa Bay. Pinellas County, it's Casa Pinellas. Pasco County, it's Sunrise Pasco. And those three centers and obviously there's 41 around the state, but those three centers in particular, I and my two fellow CEOs, we work so closely together. We're constantly making referrals, so there's no wrong door. If you call, Hillsborough, but you live in Pasco, we're going to get you linked up with resources in Pasco. Same thing if it's in Pinellas. You don't have to know how to solve. You just have to be someone willing to listen and then be able to say, hey, there is a resource and it's free, right? Did you know that the Spring has attorneys that will assist you with, deciding whether it's safe to file an injunction for protection? Sometimes it's not in your best interest, but, our attorneys, I'm very proud of our law firm, again, largest legal practice attached to Domestic Violence Center in the state. All of our attorneys work from cell phones, so they don't have desk phones. We're very nimble. We run ourselves we're not stuck in the 1980s with old style legal, nonprofit legal services. We are very much a nimble 21st century law firm. So when you call our attorneys, you're often going to speak to them on, probably 9 times out of 10 the same day. At most, you're going to wait, to the next day if they're all in court and can't take the call. And, there's only certain areas of law in which we practice that we can help you with, but our attorneys are trained to try to value add. So if it's something that we can't assist you with, we're still going to provide legal, advice, and we're going to try and tell you some next steps and kind of problem solve with you. But we practice primarily around the injunction for protection, the restraining order. But we also have one marital and family law attorney now who can help with divorce. Again, just one attorney, so we've got to kind of pick and choose the cases that we can assist with. And then we have one attorney who practices independency, which is the child welfare system, because so often a survivor of domestic violence is held accountable by our child welfare system, not because she's being abusive to her kids, but because the partner is, and they're blaming her for the partner's behavior. Again, the victim blaming is enormous. And so we say, hey, time out. You haven't said anything about her being abusive. No, we haven't, right? Then why are you holding her responsible for this other person's behavior. Let's wrap services around her, keep the kids with her instead of threatening to remove the kids and blaming her for everything that's happening.
So just as I'm going to repeat that just for people listening. If you hear something like this, really all you say is, here's who you call.
Yeah, call it the spring, right?
That seems like we could all handle that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had doctors call in a panic, like, I don't know, somebody's disclosed, I don't know what to do. I was like, do you have our materials, right? And if the answer is right, here's our phone number. And if the answer is no, I said, would you like me to bring you some palm cards, right? Because you can keep them, and you just hand them the resource. So, yeah.
That seems like something we could all be more open to and aware of.
Yeah, and we've got great partnerships. I'm going to give a shout out to the Tampa Bay Rays. So they're moving back into the stadium, right? That's now that it's got a roof again. But they're redoing a lot of the insides, including their bathrooms. And so they have a partnership with us and CASA in Ellis County. And so every single bathroom stall in the men's and women's bathrooms is going to have information, and it's safe. Play on baseball, safe at home. Are you safe at home? And then QR codes that link to CASA or the Springs websites. Yeah, and they're going to have a landing page to talk about domestic violence. So there are so many ways businesses can get involved too. We have clings that you can put on mirrors that we print and provide. So a business can put mirror clings in their bathrooms so that their staff know who the resource is. That's easy. It doesn't cost the business any money. We'll come and stick them in there.
Well, I imagine people going through something that terrible probably feel like they're the only person going through it.
They sure do.
And when you see something like a sign in the restroom, maybe it occurs to you that this is a much wider problem than just you. And there are resources.
Yeah.
Like when you see something like that's
100%.
I think has such a wide.
Hillsborough County government, did that for me. Mike Merrill was the county administrator at the time, probably 10, 11 years ago. And I asked him if he could do this. And I said, I want it to be done, not just for the spring, but also for the crisis center, for sexual assault and suicide and for human trafficking. And so we drafted signage, and he printed it and put it in a frame. And it's every county building. There's like 1,000 bathrooms, because you think about libraries, all the county buildings, all the rec centers. And we have literally had survivors where, we ask, how did you find out about the spraying? And we've had survivors say, I was in the library with my kids and I went to the bathroom and I saw the sign. And so I wrote down the information.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you've been interviewed 100 times.
Sure.
And testified in national commissions, and all the talking points.
Yeah.
But what's the thing that still breaks through the professional armor and genuinely gets to you?
I mean, I think it's just, my team, they are the boots on the ground direct service folks, right? I'm not a program staff member. I'm in administration primarily. So I've got to give kudos to my team, because every day they're sometimes listening to, 6, 7, 8 people tell their story. And it's incredibly draining, because even with all the resources we have, right, the needs of survivors are like this big. And sometimes we can help with this much. Sometimes it's only this much, right? Sometimes we can help with everything they need. But a lot of times you're sitting and listening to somebody pour their heart and soul out, and you're knowing you can only help so much. But I would say there's still people call me. So every week there's a survivor. Yesterday I took a call from a person I just met the week before in a professional setting. She's a vice president of a major university, and was calling about somebody she knows who needs help. So I'm linking our legal team to the survivor that she's trying to help. So kudos to her for being the person who hears what's happening and says, I can link you to resources. But it's those calls, right? When somebody calls and shares what's going on behind closed doors that are still, even, 14 years in, it's still shocking to me, the disclosures that people share about, what their partner is doing to them, and the sadistic levels of violence that primarily men are perpetrating against partners that they say they love, right? The mothers of their children, that they're perpetrating sometimes in the presence of the kids, that, little kids are barricading themselves behind doors. because that's what mom says when dad gets violent, you and your brother should go behind this door and barricade yourself. And no matter what you hear, don't come out because I don't want you to be unsafe. And then hearing, kids then are growing up in that environment. And then, those same kids are now 13, 14, and it's still going on if mom hasn't had the resources or tools to be able to leave. And now they're stepping in and intervening and putting themselves in harm's way between, trying to protect mom, or they're starting to become like their dad, right? And starting to be the perpetrator and starting to say ugly things to their mom and treat their mom because the abuser has taught them to say mean words and to treat their mom like she's their servant. And you think you've heard it all and you really haven't. So I think those are the gut punches that still happen on a frequent basis. It's just, I was blessed. I'm one of the people who is in this work, not because I personally experienced it, which is, a lot of people have personally experienced, not all of us have. But I was so blessed to grow up in a household where my parents were kind and loving. I think it just breaks my heart that so many people in our neighborhoods and so many of my friends weren't able to grow up in that, kind of idyllic childhood.
So what do you do when you're dealing with this just heavy, like emotional stuff every day? Like, what do you do personally to recharge?
Yeah. Yeah, I have a Peloton in my bedroom, right? I have a treadmill in my garage. I have really good friends. I have my son, who is amazing and is such a good, such a good sidekick and supporter. So I think it's, relying on friends, family, making sure you spend time for yourself. We have a culture code that we created at the spring. There's 15 guiding behaviors that we have, fundamental behaviors, and one of them is, my favorite is number 5, be willing to sweep the floors, which is both like practical, I sweep the floors, but also metaphorical. But number 3, I think, is I think it's number 3, 3 or 4. Self-care is critical to your success. And so one of the things we've done at the spring, and I'm really proud of this, because again, we're a $9.5 million agency with about 90 employees. But one of our employees is a full-time employee, is our staff wellness coordinator. So we have a director of HR, but then we have a staff wellness coordinator, which is really unusual for a company as small as we are, and particularly in the nonprofit sector. But Annalise, her name's Annalise, her full-time job is to help our staff be well. It's to do one-on-one wellness check-ins with our staff, to organize, desk stretches and yoga. We've got a chiropractor coming in to do some free chiropractic work, I think next week. We do, activities and fun things. We have wellness challenges. So we have an app that we pay for that we can do like a step challenge. And then there's a wellness box that you can earn prizes. And so we've had, a company come in and you get on a bicycle and while you're pedaling on the bicycle, it's running a blender and you're making healthy smoothies. So like goofy fun to try and make sure people are taking time for themselves. We have really generous PTO. I'm really bad about using it. I'm the worst in the agency about using the PTO, but it's because I want to make sure everyone else is using their PTO. But the one gift I have is that I am able to disconnect when I'm not at work. I don't like working from home. Throughout the pandemic, I think there was one day I worked from home. I literally was in the office. Most of our team, we never shut down services. We never stopped bringing people in. We brought in entire families who were COVID positive, right? Because our mission is, right, you're still in danger. I like the fact that when I'm physically at one of our program sites, I am working, but when I'm at home, I'm home. So that's one balance that's just has worked for me, is I can turn off my work brain at home. And it's not that I don't check in. Like first thing I do when I get up, right before I go to bed, I look at my email or I look at my text messages to make sure there's nothing like emergency. And I do have to keep my phone on all night because occasionally people are going to call me in the middle of the night or they're going to call me on the weekend. But I can detach from that. So I think that's helpful to me. I'd love to travel more, but I'm also a nonprofit person, so it's not like I'm making a ton of money, right? Everything's gotten more expensive. So I find ways to have fun with family and friends that keep me grounded. And and then I'm hoping that what we're doing with our staff and our wellness program is helping them stay grounded too.
That's really cool. And I'm
Yeah.
sure your staff really appreciate it.
They do, right? And when we're recruiting, it's probably my director of human resources is always laughing. No one wants to speak to me. They all want to speak to Annalise when they go out and do tabling events or they're doing recruitment events. Everybody wants to tell me more about this wellness coordinator. So yeah.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
So now you're in the middle of a capital campaign.
Yeah.
Right? You mentioned the 50th anniversary coming up. So tell me about that vision. What does the spring look like when that's fully realized?
Yeah. So, I mean, our capital campaign, we've raised most of the money. We've got about $750,000 left. We built a building. We bought an 85-year-old building about 3 years ago with a lead gift from a donor for $2 million. So the building purchase price was $2.1 million. And the seller actually kicked in the $100,000. So sold for 2.1 and then gifted us back $100,000, which was really great. And they've become a donor. But it's an 85-year-old building in Drew Park. It was original to World War II. So I like that it's been in continuous, of service to our communities and, keeping our country safe. And, just like, the military keeps our country safe, the spring is keeping survivors and their kids safe. So I like that history. And for about 40 years after it was no longer a military institution, it was a woman-owned plumbing supply company. And the woman owner was actually the first woman president of the trade association in the state of Florida. So I like the history, right, tied to, service and to women. But we took that building and we renovated it and turned it into our non-residential survivor services center for Tampa, as well as our donation center and our thrift store. It was all in with the purchase price and then the renovation. It's about a $5.5 million project. So we're trying to close the final $750,000. We have a board member who gave us an interest-free loan for 3 years so that we could fundraise the remaining dollars. So we've got that. But then on our 50th, we're pivoting to next year. We're trying to also use the 50th as a launch pad to increase our private donations year over year to get sustainable private dollars to, better balance our public dollars. So when I started 14 years ago, we were a 50-50 split between public and private dollars. I would argue for those folks who are like, why should, a nonprofit ever have public dollars? The reality is, we're providing a critical service to victims of crime who otherwise get killed. And there's all kinds of, credible research that says when you're working with a domestic violence center like us, you're much less likely to be killed. So there is a public benefit to our services that I think would otherwise have to be provided by the government, right? People have to be able to flee if they're actively being, if somebody's trying to murder them. So we should always have public dollars. But over the last 14 years, we've done a really good job of increasing public dollars to the point where, our split for a hot minute was about a 70% public and 30% private. So now we're pushing back down to about a 60-40. I don't think we'll ever necessarily get back to a 50-50, but I'd like to keep us between 60-40, 65-35 mix of public and private dollars. And so the launch pad for 50th anniversary is really to try and get another $500,000 to $1 million annually in private gifts. And I feel like Tampa, right, with the explosive growth we've had, with all of the wealth that's moved in, it's about letting people know that this is a mission that you can invest in and that your dollars are helping kids and they're helping adults. They're helping women, right? And in a lot of cases, they're helping people, just like you. I mean, you may be wildly successful now, but you may have grown up in a household that wasn't safe. And, if you've got the means to be able to prevent that for the next, generation, the people who come behind you who maybe don't have as much means as you have, like what a great way to honor your grit and determination to pull yourself out of that relationship and that danger that you had maybe as a kid or as a young person, and help other people not experience it. So that's what we're trying to do.
It's going to be exciting. Well, just as you said, Tampa's growing so fast, attracting a whole new generation of minded leaders. So kind of just going on that, what do you ask the community right now?
Yeah.
How do they get involved?
Yeah, I mean, there are many ways, right? I'm always going to center, financial gifts, right? I mean, because we have a thrift store and donation center, there's so many people who, we have some, wonderful donors who give so much, our community is so generous with the stuff it gives. And sometimes like people that I know who have a lot of financial capacity to give, they're really generous with their stuff, but they think of the spring, I'll give my stuff, and then they go make their financial gifts somewhere else. And so the thrift store donation center is both a blessing and a curse in that regard, because also I've had like major CEOs who have really good business minds over the years who've said, well, do you get all your revenue from the thrift store? And I was like, no, like selling, $3 t-shirts is, we got to sell a lot of $3 t-shirts to, keep the lights on. And, our electric bill is about $150,000. Our food bill is, getting closer to $200,000 a year, because we're sheltering about 1,000 women and kids in shelter. We're serving 1,600 people with legal services, right? I mean, we've got our rapid rehousing program and our permanent housing programs that provide services to another several hundred people. I'm writing rent checks for about 100 families a year. And that last month's rent is now approaching, $6,000-7,000 that we're investing in a family in month one. And then the ongoing rent, right? Because you're paying first month, last month's security deposit, fees. And then it's, $2,000 to $4,000 a month, depending on the size of the family, the cost of the unit, right? Housing is a huge thing here. So we've got all of that. So we need your financial gifts. We need your stuff, right? We need your pots and pans and your bedding, and the housewares and your beautiful clothing and your handbags, because we've got an event called Handbags and Happy Hour, right? We collect gently used handbags and then we auction them off. So we need all of that stuff, but we really do need financial support, and we need volunteer support too. A lot of corporations they dip their toes in the water with us, coming and doing a corporate volunteer day at our donation center, and they have a good time, and we try and make sure they're enjoying and they see how they're helping the mission, and then we try to activate them to become engaged as donors too. And we have some really great partners in that regard. Suncoast Credit Union has been an amazing both volunteer donor and cash donor to a variety of things, and they're pouring into actual survivors now. So we've got a program we work with them where survivors are earning income, earning dollars, right, for completing financial classes that Suncoast provides, and for going back to skill up to be able to maintain a job and to be, able to be economically independent. Because if you're economically independent, then you're not going to have to rely on your abusive partner, right? If you know that you can put food on the table and a roof over your head. So I would say first and foremost, it's, cash gifts, making an annual commitment to us. And then it's donating, your stuff and donating your time. And anything else. Like we're always interested in what people want to do, and we'll try. People come out, reach out to us and say, I would like to do X. And if it's something that is going to drive our mission forward and is possible, we're going to say yes. Sometimes it's not. But if it's not, then I will often have a conversation and say, I don't think we can do this, but let me connect you to my friend or colleague or our partner, at another organization where what you're offering to do would be possible for us. Like the other day, somebody called and they wanted to completely furnish a house for someone moving in, right, leaving a domestic violence situation and moving in. And the first question I asked, and I knew the answer to this, is because it was a PR firm calling. I said, you're going to want to do media for this. Oh, yes. And I said, we cannot, because definitionally the person who is needing to move somewhere has just left a dangerous relationship. We cannot put them out, here's where, Mindy's moving to, right? Right. And, like it's like like waving a red flag in front of a bull, right, for their abuser. But I suggested a couple other nonprofits they could reach out to where the safety concerns are not the same. So, so always reach out to us. I would love the business community and the individual philanthropists out there to consider the spring as a possibility for getting involved. And, the fit might be there. You have to be interested in our mission, and there has to be the right fit. And if it's not the right fit, I love being able to connect to other people. I live in an abundance mentality. My friend Mike Sutton, who runs Habitat for Humanity, Tampa Bay Gulf Side, has been such an inspiration in that regard. That man is the most generous connector, right? If he's got a donor that he thinks would be a good donor for us, he shares that. And I've watched him do that for so many years. And I'm like, I'm going to be more like Mike. And so I've started doing the same. One of my major donors is now donating to the Domestic Violence Center in Pasco County, because she had mentioned that she wanted to dip her toes in the water and giving in Pasco. And I said, let me make that connection, because if you believe in abundance, right. There's
It's going to come back.
Right. Yeah. And it's not going to harm, right, my relationship with my donor. They're not going to start giving me less because they're giving somewhere else. And so I feel like, there's so much opportunity for people. You want people to give joyfully to your mission, not out of some sort of obligation or being strong-armed. Certainly sometimes that happens, right? Because it's, a friend of there's a lot of, I serve on boards as well. So boards, right? And then I have to ask people to do something, and then they ask me to do something. So some giving is obligational, but we want to find people who want to be joyful givers to the spring because they can see the difference that they're making with their dollars in lives transformed, right? We are transforming lives, children's lives, adults' lives. We're saving lives. So, come join our mission if you're interested.
That's awesome. Mindy, this has been great. Now,
Yeah.
Before we wrap up,
Sure.
I have 3 questions we ask everyone. We call it the lightning round. So they're completely off topic of what we have to talk about. But if you had to pick what I call a hype song, or
Sure.
people, baseball fans would say a walk-up song.
Yeah.
What would be your song that you think?
I mean, I'm not I don't use music to hype me up, but I love music. I cannot sing worth a darn, but I sing all the time. My favorite when I was growing up as a little kid was when my family was all out of the house, which was rare. And I would pop in, I'm dating myself, but the 8-track, and our stereo, and I would just sing at the top of my lungs, right? Because nobody was there to laugh at me. But if I had to pick a hype song, it would probably be one of my childhood favorites, Don't Stop Me Now, by Queen, right? And just because I have such fond memories when we were when I was going to camp in Minnesota in the summers, and we would take a week-long canoe trip. They would put us in a van with canoes and to put us into the waters between Canada and the U.S. And we would always have a boombox in the back, again, dating myself. And we would always play my cabin mates. And that was our favorite song. And we're on the road, right, getting ready to do this canoe trip. Don't Stop Me Now. So I think that would be it. But I love all music. Thanks.
And then, okay, next question is, what is currently your favorite Tampa Bay restaurant?
I mean, I'm not going to be able to give you one. I will give you a couple. I have loved forever, almost since the day I moved here, Mise en Place. What Marianne and Marty do is brilliant, and I love their new location. I'm going there next week. I was there for their opening weekend on New Year's Day, had an amazing brunch. So Mise en Place is now in Ybor City. So I'm so excited to see what's going to happen with all of that growth that Daryl Shaw is leading, and with Marianne and Marty working their magic there. The other local restaurant chain is Columbia Restaurant Group. Because, again, Marianne and Marty at Mise en Place are so generous with the community. Same thing with Columbia Restaurant Group. Eulalie, the Columbia itself, are 2 of my favorites. But I love the community harvest that they do. We're a beneficiary of that. And just their commitment to the community. So food is great. Commitment to the community is what feeds my heart and my stomach, right? And then from a standpoint of one that's not a local, but is just magical, Sunda, the Asian fusion restaurant, Vietnamese, South Asian restaurant in Midtown. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have a shredded Brussels sprouts with a little bit of shrimp and a little bit of magic. I'm not even sure what's in there. I could eat that every day, literally, if I could just drive through and get their shredded Brussels sprouts. And it's a mound that's about the size of, a very large mixing bowl. I could eat those every day for life.
We're going to try that. That's
so good.
And then last question is, what is the best business gift you've ever received?
Again, nonprofit sector. We're not getting my if it were my sister, she might say, she and her husband went to a 100-person retreat in California, and Sting was the entertainment on Saturday night for 100 people, right? The world, the for-profit world is so different than the nonprofit sector. So for me in the nonprofit sector, I was like, it would be any of the gifts that my staff or board have given. The board one time took a gently used tote, cute, tote, and had it monogrammed for me and gave it to me just because. That was really thoughtful. But probably the greatest gift is my board, my immediate past board chair, Debbie Livingston, nominated me last year for the University of South Florida's Women in Leadership and Philanthropy Community Award, which they award annually to one person who's made a profound difference in the community. I was honored to receive that award. And I think that like those are the things that are meaningful. The fact that that someone took the time to nominate me for the work that I do, and to see the value that brings, the value of our sector and the people doing stuff to make the community better. That's probably the most meaningful.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Mindy, thank you so much. This was so enjoyable, and I think we've all learned a ton and can all be better advocates for people in the community.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracie. I really appreciate what you're doing with your podcast.
Thanks. This is exactly the kind of conversation the Bay Builds exists to have, because building something that matters isn't always about revenue or market share. Sometimes it's about walking into the hardest rooms every single day and refusing to look away. If today's episode moved you, I hope you'll do something with that feeling. Visit thespring.org, donate, volunteer, or simply learn more. The number to the Spring's 24-hour crisis hotline is 813-247-7233. Save it, share it. It might be the most important thing you do today. I'm Tracie Domino, and this is The Bay Builds. We'll see you next time.